thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back in Vienna. It's a pleasure to be here in person. I'm a professor at University of Ljubljana. I did 2 sabbaticals in the government of Slovenia as a minister, and at some point I was Secretary General of the Felipe González's group on the future of Europe. That was 10 years ago, and right now I'm also involved with another of these groups that are thinking about the future of Europe. And I came across a couple of writings, a couple of works by Friedrich Hayek that actually are very much to the point of what we would like to discuss when it comes to the future of Europe. The context is the following. There is an ongoing, you may know that, the ongoing conference on the future of Europe. Politicians are going around the European Union asking citizens, what would you like the European Union to do for you? What more would you like the European Union to do for you? All in the sense of getting to that ever closer union which is written in the actual treaty of the Union. And I think Hayek actually made a couple of contributions to the way in which European Union is designed or is implemented today. I will talk about that. And I will conclude by saying that, well, the goal of the whole exercise is not an ever closer union. It's not more power for Brussels. The goal is to create peace, to create prosperity, and they are just tools for that. So the visual map of this presentation is this one, and let's go right into the gist of it. So the ongoing conference is there. It is somehow related to this phrase, to this text that appears in the Article 1 of the European of the Treaty of the European Union, which says, this treaty marks a new stage in the process of creating an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe, in which decisions are taken as closely as possible, etc., etc. In the very Treaty of the European Union, there is this idea that it should be becoming closer and closer. We had a brilliant presentation now with the Brits. They are out. They don't want that. And there are a few others that don't want that either. An interesting anecdote, similar texts were there in the constitution of the former Yugoslavia. So keep getting closer and closer and closer and more united. Similar constant changes to the treaties were there in the constitution of the Soviet Union. So there's this effort ongoing right now in Europe. You can go online and express what else you would like Brussels to do for you. There are politicians there. There are young people coming to the European Parliament. There are kind of town hall events all across Europe, people discussing what do we want in the future of Europe. And of course, in all these events, you would have people who would want Europe to do more. There are people like us, we would not go to these events and say, oh, it's good as it is, perhaps take that away or take this away and improve a little bit more on that other thing. So this is the context. This is what is going on. There are a couple of alternatives on how to view the future of the Union. The first thing that we came across in this latest group, high-level group that is operating right now, is that maybe we should stop thinking about the European Union in Westphalian principles, in the Westphalian kind of categories, where you have sovereign states and where you have kind of loose agglomerations of these states. So where you have states like Federal State of Germany and where you have organizations like NATO or United Nations, etc., which are just banding these things together. The fact is that the European Union consists of, by treaty, states which are sovereign. So Poland is a sovereign state, and Germany is sovereign, Slovenia is sovereign, etc., etc. No question about that. But there are some sovereign elements in the European Union as well. It has a parliament, it has citizens, the European Union, it has a currency, it has executive power, etc., etc. So it is more. European Union is more than United Nations, OECD, Council of Europe. But it is less than the Federal Republic of Germany or United States of America. It's no point arguing about that, and I think this arguing of Poland right now, whether it fits into that model or it fits into that model, it's counterproductive. It's something special. It's something new. There are a couple of different, in the past, there were a couple of different visions about the future of Europe. A couple of different federal approaches, like Spinelli's, let's create a federation, let's create a constitutional text that will bring all these things together with one big bang. There's Monnet's technocratic functionalist federalism. Let's step by step put more and more and more decision-making power to Brussels. There's actually an overlooked, and I will focus on that in the next minutes, Hayek's idea of liberal market federalism and the Christian democratic decentralized federalism. So these are the kind of federal futures of Europe. And of course, you have the identitarian visions on the future of Europe, which by identitarian, I mean, okay, so these are the guys who would focus on the local or some identity which is not European. They would focus on the national identities. The usual bad guys in this sense are Hungary, Poland. And you have the Christian identitarian vision on the future of Europe, like, okay, yes, let's have European Union, let's have a union, but with the goal of defending the Christian culture, civilization, etc., etc. I've been a few times around the block in Brussels, and there's a lot of debate about founding fathers of European Union and all these guys who have halls named after them in the European Parliament, or the whole buildings like the Spinelli building and the etc., etc. And what is really interesting is that nobody is mentioning Hayek in the context of how European Union is set up, except a couple of critics who call European Union to be in a Hayek's trap. And I will explain what that trap is, and there's a certain beauty to it. I think there are somehow three elements of Hayek's thought that come together in the construction of the Union. The first one is the limits of centralized knowledge. The second one is the interstate federation. And the third idea is the idea of spontaneous order, the emergent order that somehow is not planned, is not designed, but emerges from the interaction among the people. Use of knowledge in society, classic Hayek's text. Utilization of knowledge which is not given to anyone in its totality. No small group of people in the government at the top has more knowledge than the sum of all people, the sum of all citizens, the sum of all entrepreneurs. Of course, this is the kind of informational argument or epistemological argument that central planning cannot work. We have just heard a passionate statement against central planning. So central planning does not work. This is what Hayek says. It works when more people know more than few people know. Ingredient number one. Ingredient number two. Just before the Second World War, Hayek wrote a paper titled Economic Conditions of an Interstate Federation. I think he wrote it in 38, 39 or something like that. It was published in 45. And if you read these quotes here, it would render possible the creation of common rules of law, uniform monetary system, and common control of communications. Not no less important are requirements of a common policy for defense. So he is envisioning a kind of a federation where there are some things centralized. And he says the beauty of such a federation is that if you have free market plus free movement of people, etc., etc., if Brussels would like to centrally plan something, some industry, favor some industry, that industry would be more present in some countries, less present in some other countries. So half of the country would not like that kind of policy. So Brussels would be limited to central planning because not everybody would be happy with focusing, oh, we will go into wind power. And of course, the northern countries would be happy about it. The southern would say, oh, we don't have the wind. So you don't do it. And also it limits the opportunity for central planning of the national governments, because let's say a national government would like to say, oh, we will subsidize steel. They will subsidize steel at the expense of all other industries in that country. And if you have free market and no borders, no duties, no customs, the imports would be simply more competitive than the industries that would have to pay for the subsidy of that other national industry. So that limits the interventionism, the central planning of national governments. This was the Hayek's idea. So if you create a common market, create common set of rules, it would limit central planning in the center, it would limit central planning in the national capitals. Of course, not absolutely, but to a large extent, and this actually happened. And the third element, the idea of spontaneous order, another important insight of Hayek. So the order that we have, the institutions, from family to parliaments to judiciary to nation states to unions like European Union, this is not designed, this is not some centrally planned mind who had a good idea, oh, let's have nation states, and everybody would start doing that. It is a result of spontaneous order and competition of different orders. Good ideas have spread by means of an evolutionary selection. And actually there are theorists, thinkers of how European Union works, how European Union has been evolving in the past, which are actually finding that European Union has been evolving in this spontaneous way, in this way of not having a central design like Spinelli would like to have it, but gradually improving things that would work or not, and being more or less trapped in this Hayek trap of inability to have centrally planned interventionist, a lot of interventionist policies, either in Brussels or in the capitals. Of course, this has critics. Actually, it's called Hayek's trap by some socialist economists. It's not Hayek's idea. And the critique goes in two directions. It says, well, Europe is not social enough, means it's not enough redistribution from the rich to the poor, and that there is a democratic deficit. And the solution to both of these, is supposed to be, let's make Europe more like a nation state. Because in a nation state, oh, we are all Slovenians, of course rich Slovenians would help poor Slovenians. Rich Germans would help poor Germans. But rich Germans would not help poor Greeks. That's the problem. And it is called, and it is said to have a democratic deficit. So they're not democratically elected. Brussels does not have democratic legitimacy. The only democratic institution in Brussels is European Parliament. It should have more power. So the solution both to the democratic deficit issue and to the social justice issue is, let's make European Union more like a nation state. And the ever closer union agenda is about making European Union more like a nation state, which is wrong because there is no such thing as a European nation. It does not have this element of cohesion where we would kind of stick together and cheer, for the Europeans. I cheer for Slovenians, you cheer for the English, he cheers for the Icelanders, and so on and so forth. But there is a theoretical argument, well, maybe this can be done. Maybe this can be done. Maybe we can create a nation. Maybe we can create a cohesive Europeans. And Habermas said a nation is founded less on a shared lived tradition than on a set of indisputable values. I'm not quoting this to agree with Habermas. I'm quoting this to tell you, well, this is the thinking. So if we have common values, we could create common identity, we could create common, we could create this thing that would support Europe as a nation state, Europe as a tight federation. And we hear a lot in the last couple of months in particular, those of you who are from European Union, about European values. It's European values here, European values there. This is why. Because maybe this can be the substance that will bring us together. But, mic drop. Hayek. If you want to have a centrally controlled economy, if you want to have respect for the central planner, if you want to have strong central government, this can only be achieved if there is an agreement of on such a common scale of values. This is why, for example, in the socialist Yugoslavia where I lived, or in the Soviet Union, common values were so important, because it is through this enforcement or encouragement of common values that maybe you can create this demos that would allow to have a democracy on a European scale. And that's why there is a provision in the treaty. The Union is founded on the values of. You cannot dispute that these are the values. Of course they are the values. But what is the pragmatics of those values? That's a question. And another quote that somehow destroys this whole argument that the values can be, or these values that somebody put in the treaty could be the foundation of the tighter, closer union. Alan Bloom, in the closing of The American Mind, writes, "Reason cannot establish values, and its belief that it can is the stupidest and most pernicious illusion." Values are something that you feel. Values are not something that somebody decides, oh, we will put these values in the Constitution. You know, you feel like modesty is a value. You feel that it is a value. Rule of law, intellectually, maybe you think it's a value, but you don't feel it. And value is what you feel, not what is invented. So in conclusion, this is the last slide. In spite of some of you might disagree, you know, the current EU is a success in terms of creating prosperity, in terms of creating free movement, in terms of creating peace on the continent. Non-admittingly, it has realized a Hayekian vision of an interstate federation. It is creating prosperity by weakening all who could intervene in economy. Of course, this room would say, oh, they're not weak enough. But they are much weaker than they would be if their Europe would be consistent of totally independent sovereign states. It is creating peace by creating this common market, so we are trading with each other happily. And to date, the process has been spontaneous. There has not been a grand design. It's kind of trying to squeeze, trying to move it forward step by step. Now, the critics say that the EU is not democratic enough, it's not social enough, and they say, oh, we could fix. It will be more democratic, it will be more social if we make it more like a nation state. Now, the point of my talk is, if you try to do that, you destroy what makes Europe successful right now, and that is limited power that Brussels has and limited power that the capitals have. If you make it more like a nation state, all these demons of the past can come back. So keeping it as a Schrödinger federation. So if you look at it, it's federation. If you don't look at it, it's not. Is probably the best way forward. Thank you.
I wanted to ask is that I think there's a theory amongst certain people that certain countries are using the EU as an excuse to implement their policies, which they cannot do through their own national state. And what do you think about that? Is that a legitimate criticism, that certain nations use the EU to implement certain bans on, for example, products like light bulbs, and then say, oh, it's not our fault, it's the EU's fault that did it, we cannot do anything about it?
Well, Brussels is the usual scapegoat. So if you're a politician, if you're a national politician, if you do something good, it was your own doing. If you did something bad, it's because Brussels wants it and it's Brussels' fault. So that's the usual narrative. But somehow it a little bit relates to that the hands are tied, both of the central planners or would-be central planners in Brussels and the would-be central planners in the nation state. So if they don't do some stuff locally, yeah, they maybe rightly so they blame the union for it.
So, thank you very much.
Okay.